Okay, hi. Now I'm going to just go through a quick revision recap of chapter 5.1 on SOL, Standard of Living. So I will use a lot of abbreviations, a lot of shorthands here. SOL, you need to know it's split into material and non-material SOL. And every question on SOL will require you to discuss both types. Okay, because you need to show that standard of living, or in layman terms, quality of life of a resident in a country or in an economy, is going to depend on both the tangible aspects that can be measured using our national income statistics, as well as the intangible aspects that cannot be measured using NI data. Okay, so the first question when we talk about SOL is how do we measure SOL? So that was actually a very good 10 mark question in the past few years A levels, was in 2023, and this entire 10 mark question was just explain how improvements in a country's material and non-material standard of living can be measured. That's all. So it's just 10 marks of pure recall. Now what's the problem? The problem is, right, when people study or revise this topic of SOL, they like to focus on the part that the HCI notes and the lecture slides emphasize a lot, which is limitations of comparing SOL across time and across space. We'll cover that later. But the thing is, a lot of people, they revise a lot about SOL, they know a lot about SOL, but they couldn't answer this question in the A levels because they realized, how do I write about measurements of SOL with rigor? Okay, that's the hard part. So we're going to do that first, okay? Measurement. So hopefully, once you get the fundamentals right, once you learn how to write, because SOL is a topic that has a lot of fluff in it, you need to know how to turn that fluff into rigor so that you write an econs essay instead of a GP essay. Clear? So, how do we measure material standard of living? So, material or tangible well-being of a resident in an economy is going to refer, ultimately, you need to know that when we talk about this M, we mean M as in material what? Wealth, right? So, this is just going to be a measure of the quantity as well as the quality, okay, of goods and services. So I'm just going to write it in shorthand, GNS, goods and services available to a resident of an economy for consumption. Okay, so we are talking about the quality and quantity of consumer goods only. Okay, later on, when we are talking about the limitations of measuring SOL across space, we will go back to this tension of the fact that GDP measures both consumer goods and capital goods, or goods that are not produced for consumption, but MSOL only depends on the quality and quantity of consumer GNS. Okay, so this is, the definition of MSOL, and we will go back to this definition a lot of times later on in macroeconomics when we are talking about policies to improve SOL, or what might be linked to SOL. So later on you will see why this is all connected. Okay, so we know that the indicator of MSOL is, what is our favorite indicator of MSOL? GDP per capita, right? Why is it that there's this per capita? Or rather, wait, I think, let me just go back for a bit. We know that we measure it using GDP, right? There are a couple of levels to this indicator, okay? First, you have GDP, and then you can add one real in front. So from GDP to real GDP, what have I done here? GDP, as we know, gross domestic product, by definition, is just going to be the total market value of all the final goods and services newly produced within the geographical boundaries of an economy in a given period of time, usually 1 year, but do not write in a year, because that's not correct. The technical definition is in a given period of time, because technically, right, you can choose to define your period of time however you want. Okay, so if I just say GDP, it means that I am measuring GDP in some arbitrary currency, right? I can measure GDP in USD, in Zimbabwe dollars, in monkeys, in donkeys, whatever. So what is the point of adding this real in front? Is to prevent that, right? Usually real GDP, either it will be given in terms of the country's currency, or it will always be given with respect to the US dollar. Okay, so what I'm saying, real GDP, it means that it's with respect to a certain base year, right? So if I talk about a certain base year, it means that, for example, I have a table showing me real GDP with respect to constant 2010 prices. Then my entire table, it doesn't need to be with respect to a certain unfluctuating currency. It can be with respect to the local currency, which may appreciate or depreciate during this time. But as long as you have a certain base year and everything is measured with respect to this base year, this is still real GDP. Okay, this is because ultimately, what am I measuring with GDP? GDP, okay, ultimately is a measure of outputs of an economy. That's why it's the market value of final goods and services produced. I'm talking about productive output. Okay, so what I'm talking about, real national output, real national income, I'm measuring the value of output. Okay, this is to ensure that I am measuring, hang on, let me move this up. This is to ensure that everything that I measure, okay, is measured at certain constant prices. Please note this with respect to some kind of base year price, such that any increase in real national income or any increase in GDP cannot simply be due to inflation, must be due to a rise in output. Because if I don't have this real GDP, right, then I can say, let's say, oh, Zimbabwe, in July 2008, Zimbabwe's GDP was 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. In December 2008, Zimbabwe's GDP was 1 billion quintillion Zimbabwe dollars. Therefore, based on this, I can tell that my material SOL improved a lot very miraculously from July to December 2008. Is this the case? No, right? It's just because of changes in general price levels. It's just because of hyperinflation. So this is what we call nominal GDP. So if I have GDP without taking account taking into account the effect of changes in GPL, I'm talking about nominal GDP versus real GDP. Okay, so nominal GDP does not take into account, or it doesn't account for, any changes in the general price level of an economy. So real GDP is taking these changes in general price level into account. Can? I'm sorry if I'm a bit lost, or it's 8:06 in the morning. I don't think I've recorded a video this early in the morning before. So yeah, I'm a bit sleepy and lost all today. And then from GDP to real GDP is one level up, right? I can go another level up. I can add one at the back. I think I accidentally name dropped it earlier. This is per capita. Okay, so when I have real GDP per capita, this one is just to say I have taken into account changes in population. Because, right, if population grows faster than real national income, then the average individual's total share of national income is going to fall. So for example, right, if, let's say, Singapore's population in 1980 was 2 million, okay, in 2026 Singapore's population is 5.5 million. But if real GDP of Singapore stays the same, right, this means that real GDP per capita has decreased, because I need to divide by population. I think I put this in purple not so good because I'm sorry if you're writing on paper and then therefore are crying because of the color coding. But yeah, let me just put this in another color. And please know that this per capita, the point of this per capita is to account for changes in population level over time. Okay? In general, okay, in general, if you want GDP, real GDP per capita to increase, you need the rate of economic growth, or the rate of increase in real GDP, to be greater than the increase in population. Okay, so if the rate of increase in real GDP exceeds the rate of increase in population, then real GDP per capita will increase, and therefore you can say that MSOL has improved over time. Can? So now let's go on to the measurement of non-material SOL. Now this is a lot harder to measure because this is about intangibles. Okay, you're talking about quality of life. Quality is something that is very hard to measure. We can measure quantity, it's very hard to measure quality. Okay, so we know that when we're talking about non-material SOL, we need to think about things like, for example, hang on, there are a lot of things that we can consider. So the ones that HCI will want you to discuss, right, is things like working hours. This is important, because later on when we are talking about the trade-offs between MSOL and NMSOL, in order to increase the productive output of the economy, people need to work longer hours. So their MSOL might increase, but the trade-off or the unintended consequence is actually MSOL will decrease because people work longer hours, they are sad, their quality of life is uh lower. So therefore MSOL decreases. You can also talk about things like stress level, pollution level, or you can also talk about things like actually this and the other one are linked lah. About changes in we call it disamenities in this topic on SOL. But actually, this concept you've encountered it before already. Remember, you've talked about negative externalities, right? Disamenities is basically another way to talk about negative externalities in the economy. So you need to have examples. For example, you can think about the fact that, let's say, okay, wait, I don't want to repeat myself because I'll be talking about this a lot and possibly saying a lot more irrelevant bullshit inevitably later on when I talk about economic growth. Okay, so I don't want to repeat myself now, but basically, when you're talking about pollution, disamenities, all that, you don't need to give the full negative externalities figure. But which part of the externalities figure do you need to give? You need to talk about the fact that because as a trade-off to increasing MSOL, increasing GDP will also lead to greater pollution, greater sources of negative externalities. Other than pollution, things like noise level or things like inconvenience to residents. Because, right, let's say I want to increase the productive capacity of my economy. I build new infrastructure. I build new roads, new expressways, new MRT lines. So all this construction, right, it will create noise, it will create pollution, it will create inconvenience because you need to walk around the construction. It will create basically your quality of life will go down lah, because let's be honest, a construction site right in front of your front door is damn unsightly. So yeah, I hope you get what I mean. All this actually constitutes some kind of MEC, marginal external costs. I hope you recall this term. MEC to these third parties, these poor residents who they may or may not have wanted this new infrastructure in the first place. So therefore, there's going to be a you don't need to bring in the idea of overproduction, overconsumption. You just need to say that therefore the MSC is higher than the MPC, and so there is some kind of negative externality and some kind of deadweight loss to society. Please do not go and draw your negative externalities diagram. The full rigor is not needed. Okay? And then Hwa Chong will insist, absolutely insist, that you write a lot of indicators when you are discussing NMSOL. So some of the indicators that you can talk about, okay, things like, for example, your HDI, Human Development Index, and you need to know your Human Development Index talks about material well-being, talks about education level also, and it talks about the healthcare available in a country or the health of citizens. Because if you think about it, right, both of these, as a layman, you can already tell me, yes, these are very important parts of my quality of life. But it's just that it's very hard to measure. So the HDI is basically a way to quantify that. And so it does actually consider both MSOL and NMSOL in the HDI, which is why examiners love you to write about it. Because it talks about things like your real GDP, real GNP, or it also talks about GNI per capita, your gross national income. I prefer to use the thing Y to represent income because we use it before, right? YE, the income elasticity of demand. So yeah, I will write it as NY, even though some people might write it as NI. Okay, just know that I mean national income. Okay, so it talks about national income or real national income per capita, and this indicator, which is also under the HDI, some people might know it as PPP, purchasing power parity. So this one we will talk about it more when we are discussing a comparison in SOL across space. So in addition to things like this, by the way, in addition to measuring the standard of healthcare in general, they also measure things like life expectancy at birth, okay, and then education level. So all these are components of the HDI. Another one that you can talk about is the NEW, net economic welfare. So the net economic welfare is actually a composite indicator. So it also takes into account things like real GNP, real GNY, but it also subtracts. So it's a subtractive, it's a composite indicator. It subtracts undesirable cost of pollution and also other disamenities. So net economic welfare, net. So it talks about your gross national product first, and then it will subtract certain undesirable costs due to pollution, disamenities, negative externalities, etc. Okay, so that is what you need to do, and you need to make sure that you write about your indicators and also examples. So I haven't been able to write out the examples here because I don't think there's a point. You can read it in a lot of places, but just know you should memorize the examples in your lecture notes. Okay, with regards to everything that I brought up, your lecture notes might or might not have examples beyond what I have said verbally in this video, but yeah, just know that you need to illustrate using examples. Why is it that it's important to go from GDP to real GDP? Why is it that it's important to have per capita? Why is it that there might be pollution, disamenities, all that? Another note, right? Because earlier on I talked about infrastructure, right? A lot of people, they do not actually know about infrastructure beyond SG. So in the end, right, when people write a paragraph about NMSOL, they might end up using all their examples from Singapore. It's not wrong. It's just not something that examiners like. Okay? So please, I'm sure your lecture notes will have examples outside of Singapore. Please read and internalize them. And I think so far this is quite manageable. You need to know most importantly how to write about it with rigor. Don't turn it into a GP essay. Make sure you write using terms like disamenities, negative externalities, changes in general price level, all that. Okay? I think that should be it for measurement of SOL. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about limitations of comparing SOL. So this one, I'm just going to more or less just give an outline. I'm not going to basically copy out your entire lecture notes or lecture slides because honestly, I think your lecture notes and slides are a lot more law saw and a lot more detailed than I can possibly be. So it will just be a consolidation. And then after that, I'll go on to the important part about economic growth. Because actually this part, quite surprisingly, HCI got tests before, but the lecture notes never explicitly say before. So I want to spend a bit more time on this.